everyone, I'm going to be going over how to composite in depth of field. So depth of field is a photography term and it refers to the focus that you have in your images, and in this case in our animation. Now I have a really basic animation that I have set up where I have this one cube that's just moving back diagonally. You can see I have a few different types of materials here and my files all organized into collections. Now I don't need the God rays because that's from a different demo, so I'm just going to uncheck that option and I'm going to go through the process of setting up for compositing. So first of all, we have what are called different view layers. For depth of field, we only need the one view layer, and I also have some view layer settings over here for what we call path. Combined is always going to be a pass that we want, and in this case I'm going to add Z for a depth pass, and that is all we need as far as the view layer setup goes. Over in output, I've already chosen my own folder to render to. That is super important because if you leave the temp folder as the default, you can lose everything that renders to that location, because whenever the computer restarts, for whatever reason you lost power or you left it signed in and somebody else is getting signed in, whatever reason, if the computer restarts, the temp folder gets emptied, and so then you lose all your progress, which is a huge waste of time. So always set your own output location. Now I cannot use PNG for the file format because I want that depth pass where I'm keeping track of where things are in the camera view. I specifically want the OpenEXR multi-layer. That's going to give me the different pass information as part of the file. And I'm just going to go maybe about over here. Usually when you're compositing, and compositing is the stage in between the first render and the render to video, where we're really polishing and enhancing our images. And so if I render out the whole sequence and I realize, oh, I need to come back and make changes, it can waste a lot of time. So I highly recommend just doing a single test frame, or maybe a small series of frames, like maybe 3 or something. But in this case, I'm just going to do frame 18 here. And so I'm just going to come to render animation, and I'm going to let that go. All right, the render is finished. I'm just going to close, save with Command S, and I'm going to create a new general file to do the compositing in. Now technically you can composite in the original file, but it's easier to keep it separated out. The reason for that is it's going to save on rendering time, number one. It's going to cut down on processing time, number two. And then number three, it's going to prevent accidentally rendering to composite when you don't need to, or the reverse. So just easier to keep things separated out. Now, I can completely ignore everything that's in the scene here. It's going to get overridden, and I'm going to come to the compositing workspace. I'm going to check Use Nodes. The composite determines what's in the actual output, so what is actually going to get rendered. I'm going to delete the render layer node, and I'm going to replace it with Shift-A with an image node. I'm also going to add a viewer, so Shift-A, search for viewer. And for now, I'm just going to connect this over to the viewer so we can see what actually is going on. And I'm going to go and find my file right here. And that's just going to be connected to the viewer so we can see what's going on. You can customize the view over here. You can change the zoom, make it bigger or smaller. You can move it around depending on how you want it to behave. So you can do a lot of adjusting there. All right, so first of all, I'm going to add a defocus node. So I'm just searching for defocus. And I'm going to let it connect between combined and the viewer node. I'm just going to move these off to the side a little bit. And image is also going to connect to composite. So it's connected to both the viewer and the composite. All right. So there are a few things that I'm going to do here. First of all, I'm going to connect from depth to the Z pass. And I want a little bit more control over what's going on here. So I'm going to search for a math node. And this is going to be set to subtract. And I'm also going to, or actually I'm just going to duplicate this with Shift D to add another math node, but this one is going to be absolute. All right, so we can see that there is some blur going on over here, and the number that I put for the subtract value is going to be controlling where the areas of focus are. So we have the bokeh type, which is just the shape of the blur itself. And so you'll see slightly different results depending on which one you choose. The maximum amount of blur is obviously how much blur you can have in the scene. So you can have an extreme amount of blur if you increase this, or you can minimize it and have it more clear. Now the other settings are going to have an impact. I'm just going to leave this at 15 as a starting point. Now the threshold is sort of the sharpness of the transition. If you have a lower number, it's going to be a really soft transition, and if you have a higher number, it's going to be more sharp. So I'm going to put that up to 5. And then the Z scale is referring specifically to the depth. Put that maybe up to 3 for now. And then I'm really controlling the blur itself over here with the subtract node. So I'm going to try setting this to 12. And so you can see that now up close is really in focus. As I change the number here, like 10 gives me this corner in focus. And if I go too low for my particular image, it's going to start having everything out of focus. So in this particular image, 10 is a really good starting point if I want to have the animation in focus up close. Now, as I start increasing this number past 10, the focus shifts further and further back. Over here. Over there. And in this particular case, once I go much past 19, it starts going out of focus again. Going completely out of focus. So that's really it as far as controlling my depth of field, or what's in focus and what's out of focus. So everything is working pretty much the way that I want it to. I'm going to put this back to 10 for now. So at this stage, I'm just going to save my compositing file with Command S. I like to use the same name, but just with a C at the end of the name, so I know it's the compositing version of the file. So I'm just going to save that. And I'm going to head back over to the original file. And now I'm just going to render out the full sequence. In this case, just to save a little time, I am going to just render to frame 30, and then I'll bring the renders back into my compositing file. So I'm just going to render animation and let that go. It's finished. I'm just going to close out, save, and open the compositing file. From here, I'm just going to open my full sequence. In this case, it happens to be the wrong order, so I'm just going to click on the name to make sure that is correct. A to select everything, and open image. So I cannot play through because it takes a little bit of calculating, but if I scrub through, I should be able to see how this progresses. Now, I can also add keyframes to any of the different values. So maybe on frame 1, there's a keyframe for 10, but by frame 30, this is going to go up to 19, I to add a keyframe. And so over the course of the animation, the focus is going to be changing. And I can certainly spend some more time adjusting those keyframes to make sense and add additional keyframes if I need to. For now, I'm just going to leave as is, and I'm going to come over to my output settings. I highly recommend that you render to the exact same resolution that you did in the original file. So I'm just updating those settings to be accurate. Again, rendering to an actual location, not just the desktop, and I can actually render directly from video. I'm going to change the container for the encoding to QuickTime. Okay, and I also want to make sure that I'm setting the end frame. Now when I render animation, it'll go through pretty quickly because it's largely stitching things together. There's very minimal processing. All right, and that's already finished. So I am just going to close out and come over and find my video. And I can see how that looks when it's playing through. If I'm not happy with any of the settings, I can come back and change them. But otherwise, that is the basics.